Hi there, Chris here with another fresh tip for you all. In this video, we are going to take a look at painting Scinari Cathallar from the Lumineth Realm Lords in Age of Sigmar. In this video, we are going to work on the robes of said model. We're going to create a translucent effect on the model. We're going to use some Kislev flesh. We're going to slap that onto the palette, and we're going to take a very generous amount of water into our bristles. You can see they're quite swollen with water. We're going to mix that into our entire dollop of paint just to thin the color down, just so that we get a nice, smooth, even coverage. But because of the prime, it'll also provide a bit of translucency, and it allows us to kind of sketch out where we want the flesh to become very apparent. We're imagining that she's wearing a dress that is quite sheer, and we can actually see her flesh tones, through translucency. We can see the person underneath the dress kind of thing. And of course, the model's been fully assembled and it's been primed in white Stynal Res primer using an airbrush at around 25-30 psi. To get it all laid out onto the model. Not heavily. You can still see there's a little bit of gray in some areas, and I'm not 100% worried about any of that. The primer is just simply there to provide surface for the paint to grab a hold of. You can even see with this layer of the Kislev flesh I'm applying, you see like some of the primer and some of even the gray tones show through, and I'm not too worried about it. It's just really, this phase is really essentially just to sketch out where I want the where the flesh is very apparent to me. You can see there's quite a bit of flesh on that one arm that's crooked back, grabbing her necklace. Just because, obviously if there was more tension in the fabric, you would see more of the flesh. Cyberite Green and Screaming Skull are next. We're going to use some Vallejo Retarder Medium. This is for water-based acrylics, so it mixes with GW paints just fine. We're going to take 2 dollops of Cyberite Green and 1 dollop of Screaming Skull. Mix that in. We're also going to add roughly like 1-to-1 of, that's probably a little less than 1-to-1 really, of medium into the mixture. And the whole reason we're doing this, and I'm still using my shade wash brush here as the brush to apply this with, because I'm just looking to quickly scrub this on, being mindful as I approach the flesh. And of course you can see the flesh actually is a little bit deeper because I did apply a second layer as some of those points dried. And with this, I'm just going to quickly work my way through scrubbing it in. And of course, you can see here, I'm just simply moving the brush around. And anywhere where the paint gets a little close to the flesh, I take that opportunity to grab a detail brush and then quickly feather that out. And because there's retardant in the paint, it gives us plenty of working time to take care of these things. So you'll see here, for example, I'm simply feathering out those edges and drawing it in towards the main body of the color itself, creating our slight little gradient of flesh to green. And we pretty much proceed like this across the entirety of the dress itself. Realistically, as we imagine it, the color would remain quite deep and dark as we get further away from the flesh tones. And of course, where the skin, where the fabric would cling very closely to the flesh, obviously that's where we see it. Of course, you may have to reference some materials of sheer fabric. Of course, you can also just kind of duplicate what I've gone about doing here. Again, it's really straightforward. It's nothing terribly fancy. And of course, we do see quite a bit of flesh, but we can always dial that back by applying thinner and thinner layers of the green on top of the flesh to push it all back together. And in fact, if you want to go for a very subtle effect, you could lay quite a bit of green right on top of that flesh tone. Now you can see as we are laying more of this color down, and I'm just strengthening it up and getting more of a solid coverage across the fabric itself. Anywhere where I imagine that the fabric is further away from the flesh, or it's gathered very tightly, for example, you'll see some folds in some areas, and in fact, realistically, the fold itself, as it elevates away from the body, would become darker. If you can imagine that. So like you see like on the arms and her shoulder, there's actually a big fold that runs across from her, from about halfway up her chest, and it comes back, and that would actually be quite a bit of darker green. So you're imagining the fabric as it gets closer to the flesh, you're seeing more skin show through. Of course, as I quickly work my way around these areas, I also thin the green out a bit and do some glazing just to push that flesh tone down a bit more and introduce a bit more greens. We're going to take the Pallid Witch flesh and the Kislev flesh. We're going to add a little bit of retarder to this, and we are going to begin highlighting the flesh. And of course, you can see it's really noticeable on the thighs how the flesh doesn't look quite as apparent anymore. It doesn't look the same as, say, for example, her hand or the toes, which were painted just to help visualize the flesh tones. With this mixture, which is about 2 flesh to 1 screaming skull with about almost equal measure of retardant to it. And again, that's just so that when I lay it down, I have plenty of time to blend out the color. And I'm just working with these colors with a clean brush that's sort of damp. You should dry it off for the most part, and then just begin kind of feathering and blending the color out. Essentially, you're just using feathering to accomplish this. You just lay a bit of the color down, and then you just simply feather out that edge, as you can see there. Again, once if there's a little bit of moisture in your brush, you end up that ends up mixing into your movement, and you're essentially just using a glaze at that point. So be mindful of that, as where you finish your brush stroke is where the paint is going to gather, where it's going to gather and increase in intensity. Now, having done all this, I think I probably should have did the flesh first, fully rendered up the flesh to its brightest point of highlight, and then laid the green on, as I'm doing here, as I'm kind of going back and forth with the color, because where I do bring up the highlights just a little bit too intensely, I do come in with the green and just a very, very thin glaze and lay it on top of that flesh to kind of unify the tones. But as we get to the really bright points, like the knee, the top of the calf, the high points of her thighs, her shoulder, really just about these areas are the only areas that are gathering a lot of highlight and a lot of attention. Like you would see, like on her bicep or even her forearm, very little work is being done. Oh, and on top of her breast as well, we're laying a little bit more color, pushing forward more, and just because it feels like the tension on the dress, because the breeze and what have you is moving, and so the flesh would really be quite exposed in those areas. We're taking a little bit more of the screaming skull, or is it Pallid Witch flesh? I don't recall now. It's one of the brighter colors. We're adding it into this mixture just to bring it up a bit more. And with this, again, this is really more of a glaze, even though it does still have the retardant in it. We're still using this almost in a glaze-like fashion. If I do lay a little bit too much of the color down, I quickly rinse my brush off and feather the color out a little bit more. And you do really have to clean the brush off and make sure it's dry to get a really decent feathering to occur. But if you do have a bit of, a bit more moisture in the bristles than is necessary, you can just simply treat it like a glaze. Again, these are where mastery of particular techniques really helps you out in achieving your desired end result. And in fact, you've probably heard me mention many, many, many times that obviously, no particular technique is, better than another, dry brushing, layering, whatever, right? You are better served by knowing many techniques and employing them as you see fit. And this is the case in point as well. We're going to jump back to the Cyberite green. We're going to add some Achillean green. This is Citadel Contrast. We're also going to use some Citadel Contrast medium. I'm going to lay a little bit of the Cyberite green onto the palette, and I'm going to add a drop of the Achillean green, 2 drops of medium, just to help, or 3 drops, 2 or 3 drops. It really doesn't matter. We're breaking this down mostly like a shade wash, but I'm going to apply it into the recesses fairly deliberately here. And because it is a fairly thin consistency, I can quickly feather it out as we work our way through. And in fact, as I do this, I notice that it's not too much contrast occurring with that first layering. And so I will apply it multiple times. And then I don't think I actually captured on camera, but I actually thin this mixture down a bit and apply it to the entirety of the dress, feathering it down to collect at the ends with the most saturation On her other little details on her arm and like the cuffs of her dress, I build a little bit more color and intensity to there, because imagining that, you know, the dress itself is this darker green, and in fact it's you know, the thinness of the dress, that is why it looks so light and everything like that, right? Again, it's, you know, it's creating this illusion that of what we're looking at, and this is a really fantastic sculpt for trying something like this out, because the volumes on the areas are pretty clearly defined, and so it's pretty straightforward to see and imagine where shadows and color intensity would be. So again, these are pretty good areas to actually try and, you know, flex your muscles, as it were. Again, I am building deeper color towards the ends of the dress. Now, where you can see a bit of flesh where her ankles would be, I am being somewhat careful in those areas, as I do not want to destroy that illusion that we can see a bit of her flesh tone through those areas. I'm going to take some pure Achillean green, a couple drops of medium. Basically, it's a more two medium to one contrast. And then with this, I'm just going to quickly lay it down closer towards the ends of the dress, but then very quickly I'm going to come in with a clean brush and then just feather these out. You can see I'm just depositing color near the ends there, and then I'm going to quickly use a clean brush and then just feather that stuff out and create the transition. And I do this twice, and I also move more color about halfway up the dress, about where the brush currently is on the model is about where I started, and then push the color darker down towards the end of the dress to really bring forward those little details on the ends of her dress. I don't know what you would call that. The frill, I guess. I don't know. I'm not much of a dress guy or knowledgeable, but either way, you can see here again, I'm just simply laying the color down, and I'm just really basically just kind of scrubbing it in. Again, because the consistency is really, really thin, it allows you this flexibility to just kind of really haphazardly really just kind of lay the color down. You can see on the dress how it's building in intensity, and on the cuff of her dress on her arms, it's really just on the forward portions of the dress that color builds up, and it's very little's left on the arms itself or anything like that. But that is it. That is creating the sheer effect on the dress. We could push this down further, and in fact, I may, as time moves on, as we move along with this project. Big thank you to all my patrons. Without their support, these videos would not be possible. If you're considering Patreon support, click the link in the description below, and it'll take you off to that magical website called Patreon, where there are varying tiers of support, and a huge thank you to everybody who does. Take care of those brushes, and they will take care of you.